Ooh, who's really to blame? I need to know where we stand. Nora's voice trembled, but Scott didn't look up from his laptop. She wanted clarity, he wanted space. Neither could admit they were failing each other. Scott scrolled aimlessly through his inbox, pretending to focus, but her words stuck like a splinter. He knew his conversation was overdue. He knew this conversation was overdue. Nora wasn't just a high performer, she was his most driven team member, the one who would run through a brick wall if it meant getting the job done. But her intensity was starting to wear on everyone, including him. He glanced at the spreadsheet on the screen, a mess of formulas and tabs that she'd sent the night before. It was impressive, sure, but it was also a perfect example of the problem. Too much, too soon, and not enough alignment. This wasn't new. Over the past few months, Nora had started sending out Harvard Business Review articles to the team, unsolicited, with long-winded emails about how they could improve processes. She'd also taken on projects no one had assigned to her, often diving into problems outside of her department and coming back with solutions that made her colleagues bristle. Sometimes Scott wouldn't even know what she was working on until weeks later, when she'd proudly present something she thought was groundbreaking. It wasn't that the work was bad, it was that it felt like she was trying to run the team herself, whether he was on board or not. Scott! Her voice broke the silence. I hear you, he said finally, closing his laptop. He leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to meet her eyes. But I need you to trust that I'm keeping track of things. Nora frowned. With all due respect, I don't think you are. There's no clear direction. I'm working on a dozen things, but I don't even know which ones matter the most. And honestly, she hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her notebook. It feels like I'm just guessing. Scott exhaled slowly. He knew she was right, but admitting that felt like admitting failure, not just hers, but his own. I want to welcome you to the Lead with Levity podcast, where we explore the moments in leadership that challenge us, inspire us, and force us to grow. Today's story gets into a high-stakes dynamic between Scott, a manager with a little bit of a hands-off leadership style, and Nora, a high performer whose relentless drive might be actually doing more harm than good. And at its core, this isn't just a story about them, it's kind of a story about us. What happens when ambition collides with unclear direction? When your passion to get things done actually starts to outpace your manager's ability to keep up? And most importantly, who is really to blame when things start to fall apart? I want you to join me as we step back into the middle of their struggle. And I'm actually going to rewind to the moment that brought them here. Just give me the number, Nora, Scott had said earlier that morning, his tone sharper than he intended. The room had gone silent. Nora's face didn't flinch, but Scott could see the way her grip tightened on her pen. The tension was as thick as the spreadsheet she loved to create, packed with rows and rows of data that no one had asked for. It's not that simple, Nora shot back, her voice steady, but with an edge that felt like a challenge. The projection depends on a lot of factors: commodity shifts, regional demand, and the incentives No, Nora, Scott had interrupted, leaning back in his chair. When the VP asked me how much money we're making, he doesn't want a list of variables. He wants a number. One number. Scott could feel the eyes of the team on him, watching, waiting. This wasn't the first time Nora had overcomplicated things, but it was the first time he'd called her out in front of the whole group. He wasn't sure if he'd gone too far or honestly not far enough. Nora's expression had been unreadable. "If you want quick and dirty," she said, "I can do that, but it's not going to be accurate." Her words had hung in the air like a dare, and Scott had known in that moment she didn't get it. She didn't see how her need to perfect everything was costing them time, trust, and most importantly, credibility. Back in his office, Scott stared at his laptop, but his mind was stuck on the meeting. He could still feel the weight of the silence that had followed Nora's words, the unspoken tension that had seeped into the team like a slow leak. He rubbed his temples, very, very frustrated. He rubbed his temples, frustrated. "Why can't she just chill?" he muttered under his breath. And yet, he knew it wasn't that simple. Nora wasn't wrong to care so much. It was actually what made her great. But she didn't know how to channel her drive without alienating the people around her. And maybe, he admitted reluctantly, he wasn't giving her the tools to do it. Sometimes he felt like Nora was leading the team more than he was. Nora wanted a promotion. Scott wanted her to stop driving everyone nuts. Neither realized they were standing in the way of the other's success. So what do you think? Who's to blame here? I want to just pause for a moment, and I want you to think about who you identify with most in this story. Are you more like Scott, trying to juggle big picture responsibilities while keeping the team moving? Or are you more like Nora, the ambitious high performer who's constantly stepping up, but maybe stepping on a few toes in the process? Or are you more like Nora, the ambitious high performer who's constantly stepping up, but maybe stepping on a few toes in the process? I want you to take a second to choose. And here's what I want to tell you based on what you picked, which person you picked. Okay, so if you identify with Scott, this is what I want you to know. You've got someone who's willing to go the extra mile, and that's pretty rare. But if you're not giving them direction, you're wasting that potential. Clarity isn't micromanagement, it's leadership. And it's your job. So I want you to think about where your hands-off approach might actually be sending the wrong message. And if you're expecting that other person to figure everything out on their own, you could actually be setting them up for failure and frustration. And that's on you. A little upfront time and attention can actually save a lot of chaos later. And that looks like regular check-ins. It looks like clear expectations and honest conversations about what the priorities are. And that can take them from being a good performer, or even a great performer, to being someone who could be absolutely amazing for your team and for your company. And this is what I want to tell you if you identify with Nora. Your drive and your passion are incredible, but they need to be focused, okay? Trying to fix everything just to prove your value, it's not sustainable, right? It's not sustainable for you or your team. So before you take on more and more and more, I want you to just pause and I want you to ask yourself, does this actually align with what's expected of me? Did I have a conversation with someone about it? Do I know that this is a strategic priority? Am I solving the right problems right now? And most importantly, does my leader even know what I'm working on? Have I communicated with them so that I know that we're both on the same page? It's really important that, showing that you can collaborate and work within the team's goals, that's going to help other people see you as ready for the next level. So if you want a promotion, or if you just got that promotion You got to think about more than just the results. You also need to build up your relationships, okay? Now, obviously, I'm speaking to those of you who are in roles where you're a knowledge worker. You're not necessarily working in the factory or working on the kind of job where you can just kind of like clock out at the end of the day and not think about it again. You're probably thinking about solutions and problems all day long. You want to do your best work. And by that, I mean, you might even strive for perfection. You might over design, over engineer. You might spend way too much time trying to anticipate what people are going to ask for, what people need. And if that's you, you need an off switch. You need permission to say, this right here, this is good enough. And one of the biggest areas where we can all make progress is by normalizing conversations about what done actually looks like. What's the goal here? What's expected? What's necessary versus just extra? Okay? And is that extra actually appreciated? Is that extra going to be read? Is that extra going to actually lead to decisions being made? Or is that just extra time that you put in and now, no one is going to do anything with that work that you did? I want you to get out of that habit, okay? I don't want you to fall into that trap. And the good news is that either side of the equation can start this conversation. Whether you're the leader or the person on the team, you can say, hey, let's get clear on what success looks like. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on a simple framework for defining what success looks like so you can manage your energy as well as your time and expectations. So let's talk about defining done, okay? Not just finishing a task, but really knowing when you've nailed it. Because if you're anything like me or Nora in this story, you might have a tendency to overthink, overwork. You might have a tendency to try and solve problems that no one even asked you to solve, okay? And defining done isn't just about crossing something off the to-do list, because I love to make to-do lists. It helps me stay focused. But it's really about saving your sanity and keeping things clear and making sure that you're not wasting time on stuff that doesn't really matter, because that can lead to you feeling resentful, right? It can lead to you looking around at your coworkers, at your boss, and just saying, why don't you appreciate me? When the truth is, you're doing things that they didn't even ask for, right? And so it's not their fault that they don't necessarily appreciate it. So if I were in this situation, here's what I do and why it works. First, you want to define done. Defining done gets rid of the guessing game. David Allen's Getting Things Done, it's a book. There's a book by David Allen. It's called Getting Things Done. And it's a method that's all about breaking tasks into clear, actionable steps, right? When you know exactly what success looks like, you don't have to wonder. You don't have to ask, am I doing this right? Or what else should I add? Because you'll know, you'll have it defined. Second, it aligns everyone. The Project Management Institute puts it so perfectly. They say, when you define what done looks like up front, everyone's on the same page. You're not running around chasing feedback, guessing what your manager wants. No. No more of that. And third, it helps you keep your energy in check. Oliver Berkman makes a really great point about perfectionism. Oliver says perfectionism is a trap. You're wasting energy on things that don't move the needle. And when you define done, you get to focus on what actually matters. And then you let the rest of it go, right? Because we can only get so much done in our 9 to 5, our 8 to 5, our whatever hours you work. We can only get so much done. This is why you need to define done because it gives you closure. Yes, closure. Colleen Eldridge talks about how marking something as finished helps you mentally move on. That's why we love those checklists, right? We can just go, did it, done. I feel so accomplished now. I have a record of everything that I did. You're not second guessing. You stop reworking and you start making real progress because you can move on to the next thing. So, how do you actually define done? Here's what I'd ask myself and what I'd ask you to ask as well. What's the point? What are we trying to achieve here? And we ask this because when you know the goal, everything else starts to fall into place, right? You've got to set that end goal. Then you ask, what are the must-haves? What are the top 3 things that have to get done, that have to be added into this for this to be considered a success? Anything beyond that is bonus points, it's gravy, it's icing on the cake, it's the donut, it's the cookie, it's, I'm obviously hungry. It's bonus points. It's not required. So what's the point? What are the must-haves? And then third is, what does success look like? I want you to be specific. How are we going to measure this? Who needs to be happy with these results? And what are they looking for? And then what is the simplest version of this that we can make? This is, when I learned about this, y'all, I started looking at everything that I did to say, all right, what is the minimum viable product, the minimum viable solution that I can put together that we can test? We can always kind of see what the results are. We can learn from that. We can iterate. We can make the next version of this better. But what is the minimum? What is the simplest version of this that we can create? And this is what Berkman considers the sweet spot. What's the quickest, cleanest way to hit the goal without overcomplicating things? Number 5. So before you call it done, ask yourself, who do I need to check with? Who do I need to hand this off to? Who needs to give approval at different stages, right? Who needs to be involved? Next up, how much time and energy is actually realistic? Deadlines matter. Yes, they do, but so does your energy. So I want you to set limits so that you don't burn out trying to make something perfect. What can you actually accomplish within the time frame? What can you actually accomplish within the time frame? I've been in roles in my past where, as the leader of learning and development departments, we were responsible for putting on the equivalent of internal conferences for our teams, for our staff. And there's always something. You plan a year in advance for a conference, for one of these events. It is serious, intense work. And that's on top of everything else that you have to do. That's on top of the trainings. That's on top of the compliance work. That's on top of all of the reports and research and metrics that you have to run. That's on top of everything. And usually, as we get closer and closer to the day of the event, we start to think about other ways that we can make the program even better. Let's add this activity and let's build in sponsors for this and let's make sure that we get that. And you know what? I think that we need to have a playlist that we, and before you know it, it's almost like we started with a simple plan that was realistic, but then as we got closer and closer to the time, we literally would have had to work all night to do all of the wonderful things that we were thinking about doing and adding into the event. And at some point you have to say, hey, it's great. These ideas are great. We're going to have to put this on a list for next time because we are going to run out of time and we're going to kill ourselves in the process. And that's not okay, because we still need to show up with excellence at this event. We can't be crabby and tired and not on top of it, right? Okay, so that's how much time and energy is actually realistic. And then the last question is, what's done for now? If it's a long project, like I mentioned with the conference, for example, define what progress looks like today and don't let that big picture paralyze you. So the questions are, what's the point? What are the must-haves? What does success look like? What is the simplest version of this that we can come up with? Who else needs to know? How much time and energy is actually realistic? And what is done for now? Defining done isn't about doing the bare minimum. So if you're thinking, oh, in your mind, you're thinking about that person who gives you the ick, who is always saying things like, well, it's good enough. That's not and good enough, and clearly their work is not good enough. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about settling for less. I'm not talking about just doing the bare minimum. I'm talking about being intentional and saying this is what's needed to actually hit the mark, and letting yourself stop when you get there, right? Not continuing to look around for more and more to do. And I don't care if you're the boss on the team or if you're the team member. Either of you can start this conversation at any point when you start to feel unclear. And honestly, it's best to start this conversation at the very beginning so that later on, if the scope starts to get out of control, you can come back to what you've defined and you can say, hey, this is what we agreed to. Remember this? Remember we said that this is what success looks like. Now, if we need to change the requirements, that's fine. But how does that impact the deadline? How does that impact the time? And if I have other projects that I'm supposed to work on as well, can we deprioritize some of those if this really is truly something that I need to start prioritizing? So it's a simple question, right? Hey, can we talk about what success looks like? But it's something that can save you so much time, so much stress. So if you're feeling stuck in endless tweaks or second guessing everything that you do, I want you to try this out and go ahead and just answer these questions for yourself or bring them up with your team, bring them up with your supervisor, and you'll be amazed at how much easier it gets to know when you're actually done. It actually, I've brought this up before, and I've watched as people pause and they give you this look like, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about it, but I'm glad that you're bringing it up because we definitely should talk about what does success look like. All right, you've made it this far, so here's the big question. How are you going to celebrate now that it's done? Seriously, I want you to take a second and just think about that, because acknowledging when something is finished and giving yourself credit for it is a big deal. You did the work, you defined what success looks like, and now you're ready to move forward. And that's totally worth celebrating. So often we say, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to take a vacation. I'm not going to celebrate. I'm not going to even say good job, well done today until this project is done. Well, if you're waiting for a project to be done 90 days from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, a lot can happen in between now and then. There is so much going on in this world right now that is taking from our energy, that's robbing us of our joy, that's distracting us from our purpose. And if you don't take the time to celebrate your wins, even those small wins, like I made a decision today and I got some clarity about what's important to me, that is a win. And if you don't take the time to celebrate that, you are not refilling your cup. You are just allowing it to empty, 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 empty every single day. And guess what? No wonder you feel so tired by the time you're finally done, by the time you do go take that vacation. And now guess what? Not only am I so tired, but I'm getting sick because I've just run myself down, right? So that's why it's so important. Even if it's something like a quick dance party in your kitchen, treating yourself to your favorite coffee. Maybe you just take 5 minutes to breathe and say, I crushed that today. Whatever it is, don't skip it. Don't just cross it off your to-do list. I want you to get in the habit of honoring the energy and the effort that you put into it. And I want you to remember the next time that you're stuck in this endless loop of overthinking or chasing perfection, that you have tools in your toolkit. Ask the questions, define done, make it clear, and then actually let yourself be done. So how are you going to celebrate today? I hope it's something that makes you smile, because honestly, you deserve it. You're taking the time out to better yourself, to figure out how you can be better for others. And that's worth celebrating too. So I want to thank you for spending this time with me. And as always, stay light, stay bold, and keep leading with levity. If this episode resonated with you, I want to hear about it. Who did you identify with more, Scott or Nora? And what is one way that you're going to start defining done in your work or your life? I want you to share your thoughts with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Lead with Levity. Shoot me a quick message. I'd love to hear how you're taking this framework and making it your own. And if you're ready to take this a step further, I've got something exciting in the works, and I'm so excited about this. I'm building a system that you can copy and paste right into your 9-to-5. It's going to be designed to help you know and communicate your value, to find ways to make your career meaningful and fulfilling, to communicate what's important to you, to set yourself up for success in your position. And this system is going to be packed with step-by-step guidance. It's going to have templates and tutorials to take the guesswork and the stress out of getting up to speed in a new role. Because I've been there, I know how stressful it is, and I know how oftentimes people just assume that you'll figure it out or that you'll take some online course, and they sort of expect you to know. And in this day and age, they expect you to get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you want help for yourself or the leaders on your team, you can join this waitlist today at leadwithlevity.com/waitlist. And hey, if you know someone who could use a little support in their work or in the way that they lead, I want you to share this episode with them. Because my goal is honestly to help people fall back in love with what they do. And I need your help to make this possible. I really do. So as always, I want to thank you for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed, what are you doing? Subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. And it gives me a little bit of a boost too, honestly. I need it. I should have a sign up like, will work for subscriptions. So please make sure that you do that. And I'll see you next time. Until then, keep leading with levity.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lead with Levity podcast. To get resources mentioned in this episode and find out what we're all about, check us out at leadwithlevity.com.